Hey, if you're an actor at the start of your career, or if you're an actor who hasn't started at all, no judgment. But I do want you to know that it has never been a better time to get started with Backstage. Just go to backstage.com/subscribe and enter the code word envelope at checkout for a 30-day free trial. That's 30 whole days. You can browse through thousands of casting notices from thousands of filmmakers, producers, casting directors, all looking for talent just like you. Make a profile, upload a headshot, find out what kind of projects you want to be a part of. Backstage is where you book that very first role. It's also where you book that second role, and then that third role, and then you keep booking roles all the way up until you win that Oscar. And then you can come join me here on In the Envelope. We love a full circle moment here at Backstage. But first, you gotta subscribe, and again, that's 30 days free if you use the code word envelope at checkout. ENVELOPE envelope, 30 days free. Get those roles. And I'll see you back here when I interview you when you win an Oscar. Cannot wait. Welcome to In the Envelope, a podcast from Backstage, the one-stop shop for actors and creators both above and below the line. I am your host, Vinnie Mancuso, Backstage senior editor and professional entertainment obsessive. I'll be your guide through every corner of the creative industry with the help of some of your favorite stars. Here you'll find intimate, in-depth talks with today's most award-worthy names in film, television, and theater. Along the way, we'll get advice on living your best creative life, relatable stories of the highest highs and lowest lows, and maybe, just maybe, a rare peek in the envelope.
How does their brain work in order for them to get to the performance you're both trying to get to? For example, something that Brie would say a lot, which I loved, was like, because like sometimes we're just like, and then a moon is falling out of the sky, and then these people are floating or whatever. She's like, okay, what are the stakes? Are they really high right now? You know, and I'm like, oh, right. Eventually, instead of her having to ask me, I would just say, oh, then the stakes are here.
Welcome, everyone, to another new episode of In the Envelope, the Actors Podcast. I am your host, Backstage senior editor, Vinnie Mancuso, and joining us today is the great, the marvelous, if you will, writer-director Nia DaCosta. You've probably seen Nia's name in the news recently. That's no surprise. She is the director and co-writer of The Marvels, the 33rd film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Not to mention the first on-screen team-up of Brie Larson as Carol Danvers, Teyonah Parris' Monica Rambeau, and Iman Vellani's Kamala Khan. Now, there's also been all sorts of talk about the MCU lately, but that's less interesting than the fact that Nia is one of the most exciting young names in filmmaking today. She, of course, broke out with the 2018 indie drama Little Woods, starring Tessa Thompson, and she followed that up with the sequel/reimagining/reboot, doesn't matter, it was great, Candyman in 2021. And when she was tapped to helm the Marvels, that made Nia the first Black woman and the youngest person, period, to direct a Marvel movie. Nia is so great here talking about the realities, both the highs and lows, of not only making a movie at this size and getting great, intimate performances out of her actors on a massive, often blue screen set, but also, at the end of the day, making sure she added her own personal touches to the MCU. Harder than it sounds, but she did it. And finally, she also touched on her next film, Hedda, which reunites her with Tessa Thompson and is in many ways her blank check film, which she is prepping for as we speak. Let's get right into it. Here is Nia DaCosta. Nia, how's it going? How are you doing? It is a pleasure to meet you.
It's a lovely to meet you too. I'm good. I'm in the middle of all the Marvel press stuff, and also waiting for this actor strike to end so I can start production on my next film. So I'm good though.
Well, they're back at the table, back at the negotiating table.
Thank goodness.
Part of me is like, I hope it happens in the middle of this interview. I hope we get like a text or something.
That'd be amazing.
I can't wait. I can't wait for this strike to be over.
Yeah.
But of course, with as good a deal as possible.
For sure. Yeah.
Anything we can get the actors. But yeah, I can imagine that handling the press for a Marvel movie basically alone has been quite the task, I can imagine. So we will make this as painless as possible.
Oh no, it's totally. It's actually I don't mind press at all. It's just it's so funny because of the way that the schedule for the movie's release kept shifting down and down and down. Eventually, it was like overlapping with my next film. So I didn't even think I'd be able to do a lot of press or even go to the premiere because I'd be shooting. So it's actually kind of funny to not only have all this time to actually do it. I'm the only one who physically can do it. So
little did you know.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I can't wait to talk about the Marvels, but I do want to go back because we do want to provide some context and give people an idea of, how you became the filmmaker you became. So I do want to go back all the way to the beginning. Do you remember the first thing that you shot on a camera that felt to you like more than just something on a camera? Something, the first thing you shot that where you were like, oh, there's a point of view. I have used my toolbox to put something on camera that is saying something.
Ooh, okay. So it will not include any of the weird horror films I made as a young person.
You can if you want to.
No, I would say that was definitely not me, expressing my love of Korean horror films through my camera. I would say when I was in film school, actually, in your second year, you do a film. You can choose to do a class called Sight and Sound Film. And at the time, we shot on black and white reversal film on a Bolex. We recorded sound on a sound mag. We hand cut the film. We hand cut the sound. We taped it together. And then we projected it in class. And that's how we presented our films. And at the time, I was 17. I was so insecure. I was like, what am I even doing here making films, But when I look back on it, I'm like, wow, actually, I really had a point of view. And I, all those little films we made, which were between a minute to 3 minutes, maybe shorter. I was always kind of searching for something, trying new things, trying out new visual language. And it's the sort of searching that I'm continuing to do in my work, just trying to find ways to do things differently. So I think that's the first time that I would say I've really felt like I was doing something besides just pretending to drown my friend in a toilet.
which also has value, of course.
Exactly, of course, yeah.
Those, all of that stuff, I assume, exists somewhere. Is there any time where you revisit it, or is that just your earliest stuff? Is there any time for you where you're like, maybe I should go back and see what I was doing? Maybe I should see what.
No, not really. I have all of that film. It's all on these reels that I have in a bag in my mom's basement somewhere. And then I have, my 35 millimeter film that I shot in Prague at FAMU during study abroad 1 year, which is also so amazing to have been able to do that. Yeah, I have my first film, my second film, the TV I'd done. It is nice to go back actually to my film work, but the early stuff I haven't really done yet, but I think I should at some point.
You've talked a lot about, being inspired particularly early by Apocalypse Now. I'm curious, how much of who you are as a filmmaker, both through film school, through your first film, and who you are now, is kind of inspired by the fact that you were inspired early by this movie, where so much of it is the boldness of making it in the first place. The audaciousness of just getting that movie done is baked into that movie. So I'm curious, how much of that affected you now as a filmmaker?
Yeah, I feel that film was really inspiring because it was one of the films I watched in that period that made me feel like, oh wow, you can really do anything, and so much is possible to do in such a heightened way. So much is possible to do in camera. Obviously, there are huge ethical issues with how that film is made.
A couple, yeah, but
a few. But I think when I think about film now and the sort of things we just take for granted that aren't possible to do, I just don't buy any of it. And so, and I'm always searching for a way to push through that feeling of oh, that's too difficult, or that's going to be that. We can just do it with VFX, for example. That's one thing that I'm even in a VFX heavy film, I'm just like, we have to make a movie. We cannot just be pushing this off to like hundreds of VFX artists to figure it out later. You know, like we have to be here in this space and things have to feel real, et cetera, et cetera. So I think watching that film made me feel like, no, all the things I want to put on films, it's possible to do. We just have to get our shit together and do it. And then some things just aren't possible, like someone flying through space or diving into volcano or whatever. And then that's when you have great VFX. And obviously doing Marvel, like huge VFX movie. I was lucky to have the most amazing VFX supervisor, Tara DeMarco, who, like me, just really loves like invisible effects, loves things to feel grounded. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
I love that you can, there's a lesson to be taken from that movie that is not, 2 years go insane. But it is like the right lesson to take, that like, don't accept you can't do it. Just don't blow up a jungle to do it.
Exactly.
I've seen you say that when you were sort of finding out who you were as a writer, a lot of what that meant for you young was fan fiction, doing a lot of fan fiction. And I'm curious, of course that was a long time ago, but how much of that baked into you the idea of like playing in something like a Marvel sandbox, like sort of using other people's characters in a way that felt personal to you?
It's actually so funny because like Harry Potter was a huge like world of fan fiction. It was amazing. It was just a huge world and community online of people who loved it and who knew it better than J.K. Rowling did. There was this one website, I can't remember, but like that she admitted to referencing to see if something had happened in her book. So that was amazing. Yeah. And it's so amazing because that's what fandom gives in its most positive. It's a resource, it's a community, and I love that. And so it's a mix of like, on the one hand, like learning about characterization, like even learning what a Mary Sue is and trying to unpack that, like away from the misogyny of the Mary Sue title, but actually like why does this female character who's amazing and really powerful become a Mary Sue, and why does this female character who's amazing and really powerful not become a Mary Sue? And like learning about how to stay consistent to a world but also push the boundaries is something that I think the best fan fiction does, which is really fun. And yeah, I think that's like just like a craft space, but then also just from a fan point of view, I was like deeply online when I was younger, and you also just see what people appreciate about these worlds. And that's what like drew me to fandom in the first place, and comic books, and like Sailor Moon fandom was huge for me when I was younger. So I wrote like Sailor Moon fan fiction when I was like really young. And I know it's so funny. But it's really the love of a thing, like coming together around loving something, is part of why I wanted to be a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because that's my version of fandom. Like I know obviously there's a lot of like toxic stuff and like whatever, but I love it because it's about loving this thing. So those are the two things I kind of think fan fiction helped me to get to.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Is like, whenever people do talk about how much loud toxicness is in the fandom community, you can point to fan fiction as like the purest form of like, because just from like an output standpoint, people are writing thousands and thousands of words, and like you said, it's because they love it. Speaking of writing, I've seen you say that's something you were taught in film school, was the old adage, write what you know. And for a while you sort of took that literally, but a big turning point for you was that you learned to sort of write what you knew emotionally. I'm curious, what does that mean for you? Like, what does that mean in practice? Or the difference between, because I know that is something that is sort of baked into a lot of writing, teaching, formal writing, teaching, write what you know, but it is both a strength and a bit limiting at the same time. So I'm curious what it means for you to sort of write something that you know emotionally, if not literally.
Yeah, I think we're now in an era where more people are telling their own stories, which is really exciting. And for me growing up, like I think this is also something that fan fiction does and why fan fiction exists. It's like most of these worlds are super white, super male. That a lot of this, like if you're into fantasy, for example, it's like so white, so male. But obviously there's like circle of magic and other things. But like fan fiction is a response to that and saying like, hey, I want to see myself in this world, and not as like a self-insert character, but actually like I want to see myself, my emotionality, my story, my community in these worlds, because I love these worlds, and also I want to be seen in it. So that's where that impetus comes in the fan fiction realm, and I think that similar thing is what I wanted to do in writing, which was not to like literally write a story about like a girl from New York City whose parents are Jamaican and who went to boarding school and da da da. It's like, no, actually, all the experiences of that I want to see in a different kind of world. So like the most like literal thing is like taking that experience and putting it like, you know, into Hogwarts, because I went to boarding school and Hogwarts is a boarding school, you know what I mean? But then there's like my first film, which, you know, I didn't grow up in North Dakota. I didn't grow up in that kind of poverty. I never had to go cross into Canada for an abortion or anything like that. But it was something that I was really passionate about telling a story around. And for me, my access point wasn't just like the logistics of that journey and what that meant and healthcare and women's rights and et cetera. It was this story about these two sisters. And I know what that is, because I have a sister and our relationship isn't like that, but there are elements of it that carry through. And then as a writer, you use your craft to push it forward and change it and all that stuff. And, you know, in the Marvel film as well, like in my pitch, I said, these three women are like three estranged sisters who have to find each other again. So like, that's how I use what I know, emotionally to put into the writing and worlds that I don't know.
And since that's a lesson that, you know, you learned obviously through practice and doing the thing, is there any sort of advice you have for people who are looking to become storytellers, you know, whether that means directing, writing, you know, whatever it may mean, to sort of get to that place where you can take something a genre you're interested in, fantasy, sci-fi, and sort of seeing what your emotional, like you said, your emotional into that world is. Is there anything that you do? Or is that something that just sort of had to develop naturally?
You know, it's interesting. Because I always wrote, I would always be writing. Like writing was something I did from a very young age, and I just loved doing it. And I don't think I really knew why I was writing. I just felt like this urge to like write, but I don't think I really knew like what my brain was doing, what my spirit, I guess you could say, was doing, like why I was compelled to write. Yeah, so when I started writing, I wasn't really sure like why that was my thing, why I felt compelled to do it, why I felt moved to do it. And actually recently, I think, and this kind of goes to the advice part of it, there are so many things that I'm trying to work out, trying to understand about the world I live in, the position I've been placed in this world because of the way I look, because of my gender, my race, my height, my age, you know, all these markers of identity. And I'm fascinated by how these markers of identity even came into being, like being Jamaican American, for example, like two identities that did not exist 400 years ago, you know? So it's just that sort of thing, like, has recently been really fascinating to me. So I'm really interested in like colonialism and trade and how capitalism like has basically shaped what the world looks like now. You know, this is just an example, but I'm like, oh, this is a huge topic that I'm like deeply interested in. And there's so many ways to talk about it. There's so many ways to explore it. And there's so many characters inside of that. And that's, I think, how you find your font. Like, this is how you find it's like, what are you working through? Like, what are you thinking about? What moves you? What disturbs you? Usually what disturbs you is a really good place to start. Yeah, I think that's a really, really useful to kind of look at it that way.
And would you say it sort of helps to then, you know, chase those things those questions that you're curious about, those things that you're sort of, and then doing that in a world, you know, well, you know, because you said you were doing it, you know, with fantasy and stuff like that. And of course your first film was very grounded, but then, you know, moved on to horror, and now you're moving on to the superhero. Does it help to sort of surround yourself with, I guess, genre trappings and tropes that, you know, sort of just from immersing yourself in it?
I think sometimes. I think genre is super helpful. Usually because like certain things, like the audience is prepared for certain things to happen in specific genres. And so then subverting a couple of things inside of that genre, you know, you have a map for that. But I think it goes to anything, you know, like the quietest films, to the biggest films, to the most like genre heavy, like thrillers or historical epics, you know. I think it always has to come back to what you're grappling with, what you're trying to figure out, and how that relates to whoever your characters are.
I love that. So I have seen you say that, you know, when you start a film, your DP, who in this case with the Marvels is Sean Bobbitt, 12 Years a Slave, Widows, some great films, and your production designer, who is Kara from Candyman, I believe.
Yeah.
Same. You've said that they sort of get a extensive deck
Yeah.
images. And I think with Candyman, it was like, shots of Chicago, photography from local Chicago. So I'm curious, what did it look like? Did you do this for the Marvels, and what did that mood board sort of feel like to you?
Yeah, that's so funny. So with the Marvels, it's so interesting because of the way they work, where like I don't even think there wasn't a script when we like officially started prep. So it was like, okay, I know, like there's an outline, an extensive outline, you know what the story is. And then I just know what I want it to look like. And there are certain worlds that exist already. So like, usually I'm talking about like colors I want in the world, the different worlds, how they're going to react, like engage with each other, how the characters are going to sit within the world, like textures, lensing, like what kind of like framing are we going to do? What kind of glass are we going to use? Like just a big thing of like my ideas and what I think the world looks like as it relates to like the characters, as it relates to locations, as it relates to like how like the arcs of the characters and how the arc of the movie goes. And then they usually have like amazing ideas off of that are like a bajillion times better, which is so fun. And then we just like hone it down and we just get closer and closer to what the thing is. And I think since this Marvel film, like because of the way they develop things and sort of a moving target at times, like it continues to develop and churn and change, and which is really fun, and we have a lot of time to do that. We have like there's a long prep process, a long shoot obviously, and long post. So yeah, it's really interesting. The funny thing is actually the movie I'm doing now was not that at all. It was like very different. Mm-hmm. So I didn't actually send like a huge deck to either of them this time, which was like my first time not doing that. Like when I was doing TV or even a small like commercial, I always did that. And it's my first time I didn't. I think it's because like I've written the script, it'd been done for a while. Like they read it, the script's super clear about what it is. Mm-hmm. And it's like one big location. So for Kara, her work was like, okay, let me find this location. And also it's a period. So let me tell you what this period is like. And I had some ideas like these colors, whatever. And then with Sean, we were just interested in like doing something no one had seen before. So going to find references from other things just didn't seem like the way to like make a very unique movie.
The reference is something nobody is
exactly is not
invent really, something new.
Exactly. Which I always try to do, because I think it's like, even when it comes to like creating those decks, like I try not to use images from other films unless there's something very specific that I'm trying to show that someone's done. Yeah, I'm like always trying to push like I don't want us to get stuck or complacent inside of film language, because I think there's so much more to do, so much further to push when it comes to that.
It's interesting because, not only do you have the 30-odd MCU films that came before, but you're dealing with decades of comic book imagery, a very image-focused. So it's interesting that you're sort of like, I want to use that history and get to a place where we're showing people things that they've not seen before.
Yeah.
How does that sort of get mixed into the process when you then eventually do get a script? It's interesting to me that you sort of are coming up with a mood and a tone and sort of the colors and the vibe, and then the script comes later.
Yeah.
How does that get molded into sort of what you're already envisioning?
Oh man, it's a rolling process, and like I would do a pass on the script, like my writers and I would like pass it back and forth, because it's like, it's a mix of like, hey, what's in my head? What are you trying to do? Because we're all going to the same vision, like whatever Marvel wants, like we're trying to get to that thing, while also putting in like what they hired us for, which is our own unique set of skills and and our vision and our talent, whatever. So it's really like this, it's almost like a game of tennis. You're just like batting this ball back and forth, and then the ball keeps changing, and eventually you're like, oh, the ball is so beautiful now, and then you shoot it.
And I love that. So there's one other thing that I sort of saw you say in the past that I just found really interesting, that I sort of would love a little bit more idea of what it means, is that when you're talking to your DP, you said that you talk a lot about how to draw humanity and character out of a face. What does that mean for you specifically? Because it's very interesting, especially in something like Candyman and something like the Marvels, where it's very character focused. It's very, you're drawing a lot out of a person's face.
Yeah.
So what does that mean for you as, a director, storyteller?
That's so funny, because I don't even remember saying that, but I've said so many things that people can hold me to. So it's a mix of, something that I like to, which is like, I guess maybe very straightforward filmmaking, but I really like to figure out how we're going to visually represent spaces and characters as the movie progresses. So, for example, like on Carol's ship, which is a set that, it's in the trailer, so I can talk about. We wanted to change the way that space felt based on the relationship between the three women and how it shifts throughout the film. So it's cold and sort of moody when Carol's there alone, being like a space emo. And then when these women come in and crash her situation and they end up becoming closer on a team, it gets warmer and warmer as we go along, like in the most basic sense to explain it. But so that's like one thing. And then within that space, you have the characters and their faces, and you have one like performance and that sort of direction, what they're bringing, what I'm asking for. But then also with the lighting and the glass you use, like I'm obsessed with, I love lenses so much. I love learning about lenses. I love all the kooky, weird shit that you can get and how it changes the face and how it makes the face really beautiful or distressing to look at or slightly off. And I think it's about really choosing those things really carefully in each instance to maybe not fully consciously, but in some way signal to the audience like who this person is. And humanity is important because otherwise, why are we watching these people? Even with villains or people who do terrible things in films, I think it's important that we are able to show them in their truth, I guess.
The lens rabbit hole is a good one to go down because it is remarkable, like the subtle shifts that can happen. Same camera, 4 different lenses.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that something even mentioning that you wanted to subtly change Carol's environment. Just like anything that sort of shifts any sort of character progression in these characters. I'm curious, and you've talked about this a little bit, how you sort of balance or walk the tightrope of wanting to put something like that in and also being aware that this is a film being slotted into a larger tapestry, that you can't do the butterfly effect, like something can't mess up something 8 films down the road. I'm sure that's a balancing act. So how did you sort of sit down with it and be like, okay, here's what I cannot do or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, visually Marvel's pretty much like, have at it, do whatever you want, which I loved. I mean, that changes a bit when it comes to VFX because so much of their world is built there and so much of it has already been established, like what a jump point looks like, what these power, like Carol's power, what that looks like, what Kamala's power looks like. But it's fun to get to push these and develop them. And like, I changed some things a bit just to suit my taste a bit more. And I think for me, because I really love comic books and I'm used to this thing when like you're reading a run of like, let's say you're reading like Iron Fist and then a new creative team takes over, a new artist takes over, it looks completely different and the same story is happening. And you just accept it because you're like, and sometimes you don't like it, but you're like, this is how comics work. And that's what I think is fun about the MCU. It's like, I mean, they all basically have a general energy because it is the same like universe, but the way I do space in my film is very different from the way James Gunn does space in his film, and it looks slightly different from like Ragnarok space, and we have the latitude to do that. The place where you can't really go crazy you can if it all works, but is like story. Like the story is really, has to fit together. Yeah.
In terms of like playing around with these characters that have been established, I do want to talk to you about how you work with actors. How you sort of have learned to talk to actors and how you have applied that to this thing that is gigantic and sort of but personal at the same time. So I do want to just ask, how you've developed the way that you talk to actors. I think I've seen you say that you read Michael Caine's book on acting. You went to a drama school to get your writing degree. So there's a lot of you have a lot of acting in your brain. So I'm curious sort of how you developed the way that you approach actors, and that can vary from actor to actor, but overall.
That's a good question. So one thing you just get better and better, I think, is listening to the way they need to be spoken to, in the sense of like, how does their brain work in order for them to get to the performance you're both trying to get to. So, for example, something that Brie would say a lot, which I loved, was like, because like sometimes we're just like, you're like, and then a moon is falling out of the sky, and then these people are floating or whatever. And she's like, okay, what are the stakes? Are they really high right now? And I'm like, oh, right. And so eventually, instead of her having to ask me, I would just say, oh, and the stakes are here. And then with Tiana, for example, I noticed like her brain is like super into the specifics and the minutia. So it's just like building in that amount of detail. And I think it's just like each actor has a slightly different like way. Some people are so different, but and the ones that I'd like to hire and work with have a specific way of like understanding the world that they have to play in. And so you figure out how to play with them basically. But honestly, if I'm being honest, like I know a lot of directors say this, but like half of it is casting. Like, obviously in a Marvel film, like I inherited a ton of actors, but like Sam Jackson as Fury, for example, the man has played Fury for 10 years. Like he knows what the hell is going on. You know what I mean? He knows what's happening. And so a lot of the direction there or like the conversations are like, how does this fit? How does Fury fit into this specific story, this specific movie? But usually like my preference is actors who are pretty good at articulating their needs so that we can help each other.
Absolutely.
But for people who aren't, like I worked with a lot of non-actors on Top Boy, it's really just listening initially. And then when you get that glimmer of like, that's what it is, just leaning into that more.
Absolutely. I love listening to Samuel L. Jackson talk about, I think he did an interview recently where it's like, he knows it so well that he's not going to give you too much experimentation because it's like, I'll give you what I know. And that's exactly. What you get. Yeah. I do want to sort of jump off of that, ask, about balancing drawing out, you mentioned drawing out humanity in the face and giving actors sort of space to really just do what they do in that scenario, balancing that with the massive technical aspects around it. There's thousands of people on the set. You have to keep continuity. You have to make sure everything's good for the post-production process. You really can't mess around with that too much, but you do want to give actors their space to do what they do. Yeah. So how do you keep that collaboration when there's also 1,000 moving parts happening around the performance?
Yeah. Basically, like, okay, so when I was doing my first film, Little Woods, like we do pretty standard, like call the actors in, bring them to set before they go through hair and makeup, blocking rehearsal, figure out what we're going to do. Okay, this is cool. Then the DP and I will watch them do it. We'll talk about what the shots are going to be. I like to tell the actors what we're thinking for the shots so they're not just like feeling like sacks of meat who like are moat and then get like, moved around. And then we all are like, hey, this is what it's going to be. And then we bring the crew in, show the crew. And then we send the actors off to hair and makeup, and then everyone does what they need to do to get the first shot ready. All of that I do on a Marvel set as well. And then when it comes to the actual like shooting of the scene, then you have like, my camera, maybe there's A camera and B camera. And then you have the effects who is like two people taking pictures so that they can get references for, what they need to do in post. And then after you finish the setup, you have to do clean plates. And then, there's all this stuff to do. And so for me, that time when you're rehearsing with just the actors and the AD and the DP and the scripty, and you're figuring it out, really like taking your time with that, because after that it's just going to be crazy. And then also in between, just like I like to keep people, like I'm very conscious of like eye lines, and I'm always checking in with them, like because sometimes someone has to just be standing somewhere inconvenient, and it's like, is this going to be okay with you? If it's not, cool, we'll figure something else out. If it is, then great. But also I think after a while, like Brie in particular, it's like she's like, I get it, like this is we're all technicians, like acting is obviously a specific thing, but so is, being a writer on set. So is directing. So is, being the gaffer, being another spark, etc. So I think, and this again goes into casting, if you can cast the right people who kind of feel like, oh, I get it, I can articulate what my needs are, thank you for asking, and also I understand that I'm a technician inside of this big machine as well, then usually you're okay.
Is it I again, this is something I just read, that the first time you directed Brie and Iman was for the Worlds of Marvel on the dancing cruise ship. It's an interactive dining experience. Yeah. I'm curious what that first time was like, and how that affected then working with them recently after that. Your reaction was not glowing. So I am curious about that.
So I did the cruise thing, and then also shot Brie for a roller coaster.
Great.
Roller coaster is really fun. I rode it in Disney Paris. I loved it.
Amazing.
Here's what I'll say. The first thing I'll say is like the people who produce this content and like have to make this and whatever are amazing. It's brilliant. I know like Kevin really loves doing it because it's like, it's fucking cool, man. Like you make this movie and then like there's a roller coaster and then there's like this crazy giant slide on a cruise or whatever. There's this, you know, like interactive experience here and there. Like that's really cool to connect with like the bigger impact of this thing that you're doing. At the same time, it's sort of like everything I was promised that making a Marvel movie would not be, which was like someone over your shoulder, make sure you do this, da-da-da-da, telling you how to shoot, blah, blah, blah. And I think for my first 2 days, because they were also my first 2 days shooting, I was like, whew, this is not what we're going to be doing when we're shooting the actual movie. And I was like, oh my God, what an awful way to meet my actors. Like, this is not cool. But then, of course, like, you get into it and you're like, oh, this is like, Bree's done this before. Iman, I don't think has done it before, but it was like an interesting way to get to know them. And also it was like, ended up being really cool to see how the crew, because my entire crew was also shooting it, seeing how my crew worked together. It was first time for me shooting in an entirely blue screen space. And so it was like a little bit of a fun, like little start, incidentally at the most inconvenient time, like 2 weeks before we were supposed to shoot. But it ended up being like really interesting and really informative.
Yeah. Oh, and when you start from there, you know, it can only go
go up. Exactly. Yeah.
And I have, you know, I've seen you say, and I promise this is probably the last thing, the last former quote you've given that I'm going to throw back at you.
Full words. Yeah.
But I've seen you say, you know, you love working with actors because you love bringing out different sides of them. That was, you know, you're talking about Little Woods, but, you know, I think that you're also referring to Candyman as well. So I'm curious, you know, when you, again, this is a large scale project and these are people who have played these characters before. Yeah. But you are interested as a storyteller and a filmmaker in showing people things that they have not seen. So I'm curious, you know, in what ways you were working and succeeded in bringing out different sides of, you know, your three leads, you know, Brie, Teyonah, and Iman. How would you say that you brought out the other sides of them that people have not seen before?
I can speak specifically to Teyonah because we'd worked together before. And so for me, one of the funniest things was there was a day when we were shooting Candyman and she has to like look and like see this horrifying thing and then scream and like wake up from a dream. And she was having the hardest time. Like, she was like, but nothing's there. She's like, what? She's like, how am I supposed to react? Like, she's like, nothing's there. Like, this is, And I was like, I know it. And then we did a couple takes and she's like, I don't feel it. And of course, for me, I'm looking at it and it looks amazing because she's amazing. And I'm like, I know you don't feel it, but it's okay because I see it. And like, she's like, all right. And then we did it. And then she got WandaVision and she jokingly was like, she got WandaVision. What happened? She got WandaVision and then I got the Marvels. And she was like, oh no, Nia knows I can't act against something that's not there or something like that. And which of course she can, but just like something she wasn't like comfortable with. But we got on set for the Marvels, and it's that moment from Candyman times 1,000.
Yeah.
Entire days, sometimes entire weeks or an entire week where we're just on a blue screen stage. There's like a platform where there's like one set piece or whatever. And also it's like a lot of action. She'd never done action before. And to see her become a superhero, like to see her like deftly be able to like look at a orange X on a blue screen and like, you know, start crying or like seeing, you know, her mother or whatever. Like it was amazing to see that and to be able to be a part of like that journey. And that's something that's sort of what I mean. It's like being able to like be there and be a part of someone doing something they never thought they could do as an actor, which I find really exciting. Brie she done it before. I think for me with the character, I really wanted to bring something different out of the character. I wanted to move more into her emotional depth. I wanted to, now that she has her memories back, I wanted to know what it was like to be a woman who thinks they have the entire universe on their shoulders. And then Iman, I just want to hang out with Iman. She's amazing. I love her so much. And she, you know, her first job was Miss Marvel. Her second job was the Marvel. So it was just amazing to, again, it's just like being on that journey and seeing more of what she can do as opposed to like something different, I guess.
Well, I'm curious about working with Iman because, you know, you've worked with young actors before on Little Woods, but you know, like you mentioned, she's so. This is her first. These are her first gigs, and she feels so comfortable in front of the camera, comfortable with this sort of world. So when it comes to specifically working with actors, what is your experience like working with someone like Iman, who is so, I don't want to say raw, but she's still sort of learning and doing this as she does it.
Yeah. Iman's amazing because she's like the most professional, the most prepared, the most wonderful to be around. She's like truly a wonderful human and amazing actor. And like the only thing I ever said to her, I was never like, here's what you need to know, girl. I was like, don't pick up any bad habits you pick up, that you see. It may be like, just don't, but like stay who you are because you are perfect, It was amazing to work with her and to get to know her. Yeah, I mean, it's also really fun because she's such a Marvel nerd. So there was one day we were shooting and we were trying to figure something out. And we're like, oh my God. And she's like, I think. And I was like, wait, just give me a second. I just need to figure it out. She's like, okay. And we shot this whole thing. And she was like, so what I was going to say was XYZ. And we're like, oh, that solves all of our problems. Thank you, Iman. Like, she's great.
I love that. So, you've talked before and you've said that this wasn't something like somebody going straight from the indies and then like accidentally doing a big, like you wanted to do bigger movies, you wanted to work in large genres, stuff like this. So I'm curious as we sort of get to the other side of it, what are you taking from the Marvel experience into, the stuff you do next? Like what is the takeaway from this process that you are most excited to then bring to something different or something smaller or something more, whatever?
Well, I'm definitely a lot more confident in my ability to make a movie, like just the physical work, the endurance, the rigor of making a film. It was the longest shoot I'd ever done by a long shot. It was 80 something days. And then you add a reshoots to that. It's, however long that would be. And it's like, my longest shoot before that was 35 days. No, not even 32 days was my longest shoot before that. So that's one. And then being able to work with at such a large scale, like the equipment, the crew, everything just gets bigger, and being able to like stepping onto that set and having an amazing crew who are just truly the best and being in command of all that. I was like, oh, I can do this. Okay, cool. Like that's informative. I think that's the biggest thing. It's like realizing I can do it and also realizing how hard it is. Mm-hmm. But also like that's the way films are supposed to be hard. Like they're supposed to be hard because the work itself of trying to make the best thing is rigorous. That's the thing I'm going to take away the most. Like the confidence that I could actually kind of do anything now.
Mm-hmm. That Apocalypse Now idea, but in a much more controlled environment.
Much more controlled, less drama. I'm very anti-drama on set. I won't be cursing out any actors. No one will be having a heart attack.
In the middle of the jungle,
sort of exactly. No cocaine on my sets. But yeah, that is what's I think the most exciting about doing any film. So you're like, oh man, I can do that. Great, cool.
So as we sort of wrap up here, I do want to ask just one more general question for you. If somebody was to watch a Nia DaCosta movie and be inspired in the way that you were inspired by Apocalypse Now, what would you want or hope the takeaway would be for them?
Ooh, I feel like this will be most true on my next film. But the thing that inspired me about Apocalypse Now was that this filmmaker and this team set out to do something, and it was like so true to what they wanted to do, especially what Coppola wanted to do. And I hope if someone watches, as in particular my next film, and they're inspired to do exactly what they feel, or to tell the exact story that they want to tell. Like, I think that's the most powerful thing about being a storyteller. It's like, you're your individual person, you're unique because you are yourself and not anyone else. And so the way you see the world is going to be so special and unique. And that's what you have to do. That's what you have to express to everyone. You can't try to be like anyone else. So I hope that they feel that when they watch my work and they feel inspired to go do that themselves.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Nia, again, thank you so much for being here.
Vinnie.
I hope that we get this deal done and you can take a rest for a little bit and get started on this next movie, which it sounds incredible. I'm so excited to see, the Marvels and everything that comes after.
Thank you so much.
But this was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, as always, to our brilliant producer, Jamie Muffett, and to the whole team at Backstage. Samantha Sherlock, Mark Stinson, Caitlin Watkins, and of course, Kasey Howe. Visit Backstage.com, and don't forget, you can subscribe to Backstage with code ENVELOPE at checkout for a free trial. 100% free, you simply cannot beat that. For more exclusive content, find us on Facebook and Twitter at In The Envelope, and subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Who should we interview next? Let us know. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another peek in the envelope.